Welcome to This Explainer. Today we're looking at something that affects literally almost every single one of us. Now, what if I told you that some government projects actually take longer to finish than it takes a tech startup to reach $1 billion valuation? I know it sounds totally crazy, but it's the very real, everyday reality of modern infrastructure.
Okay, let's dive into this. We've all felt the frustration, right? You see a brand new metro line that was supposed to be completed in, say, 5 years, and it ends up taking 12. Or a bridge that was announced before you were even born, and somehow it's still under construction today. So the big question we're answering here is, why do government projects take so long? Is it just corruption holding everything back, or is there something much, much deeper going on beneath the surface?
Here is our roadmap for today to help demystify this frustrating reality. We're going to peel back the layers of this complex systemic failure by looking at 1. The grand promise, 2. The bureaucratic maze, 3. The money pit, 4. The mega project paradox, and finally 5. The price we pay. Let's start right in with part 1, the grand promise, expectation versus reality. It's no secret that every government absolutely loves announcing big projects. We're talking new airports, smart cities, blazing fast bullet trains. The promise brings you super exciting headlines, massive political capital, and a huge surge in investor confidence. It's incredibly easy to do and highly rewarding for politicians. But the reality of actually building the thing? Yeah, that's a completely different story. Decades of grueling construction, grinding legal halts, and stalled progress quickly replaced those initial cheers. Take California's high-speed rail, for example. It was initially promised to quickly connect Los Angeles and San Francisco, but its timeline is now stretching far out into the 2030s. The gap between expectation and execution is just staggering. Which brings us to the structural frictions in part 2. The bureaucratic maze, navigating the red tape. So the very first major obstacle you hit is the land itself. Imagine trying to build a new highway. That route passes directly through hundreds of private properties, farms, and villages. Every single piece of that land belongs to someone. Some folks will agree to sell, sure, but others hold out, and honestly, who wouldn't want top dollar for their own backyard? Before a single brick is even laid, just trying to acquire these hundreds of private parcels can stall a project in court for years. And this brilliantly illustrates what happens next. Once you finally have the land, you hit the next massive hurdle, the paperwork. A large government project requires approvals from this cascading chain of departments. Step 1, environmental clearance. Step 2, local and state approvals. Step 3, safety assessments. And Step 4, complex financial and engineering reviews. Each of these departments has its own completely separate process, its own timeline, and its own priorities. If just one single approval in this massive bureaucratic chain gets delayed, the entire project completely stops moving forward. Then, we have to factor in the clock. Infrastructure projects often take 10 to 20 years to complete, but governments and politicians change much, much faster than that. A project started by one administration will inevitably be inherited by another. The new government might want to pause it, review it, or completely redesign the whole thing to fit their own policies. So what starts out purely as an engineering project inevitably morphs into a political one. And politics, as we well know, is rarely fast. Let's move on to the financial fallout in part 3, the money pit, compounding systemic frictions. 10,000 crore rupees, or to put that into perspective, roughly over $1 billion, depending on where you are. This is a massive initial budget. But what's absolutely vital to understand here is that this huge number is really just the starting line for a mega project. It's merely what the project was supposed to cost on day one, back when it was first drawn up on paper. But what happens when those delays we talked about kick in? Well, back in 2018, the costs for steel, cement, and labor were relatively low. But as years pass while a project sits in bureaucratic purgatory, inflation naturally rises, material costs skyrocket. Suddenly, that original 10,000 crore budget balloons to 15,000 or even 20,000 crore. In this world, time literally equals money, and it creates this terrible self-sabotaging loop. Let's walk through it. Initial delays occur. Because of those delays, material and labor costs rise with inflation. Because costs rise, the government now has to go back and seek entirely new funding approvals. Old contracts fail because the math simply doesn't work anymore, so new tenders must be issued. And restarting that whole process causes, you guessed it, even more delays. It's a vicious cycle. Now, what's really interesting about this line is how the system tries to solve this through fair bidding, but accidentally creates what we call the tender trap. Government projects are usually awarded to the lowest bidder to ensure transparency. Makes sense, right? However, trying to save money up front frequently means selecting a contractor who lacks sufficient resources. They quickly run into equipment shortages, labor issues, and cash flow problems. The contract fails, and the government loses months or even years having to completely start over.
Of course, when we talk about this, everyone immediately thinks of corruption, bribery, inflated contracts, favoritism, and while those are very real issues, we have to look deeper. The data shows us that even countries with relatively low corruption levels experience massive project delays. It's super easy to make the lazy assumption that it's just bribery holding things up, but the reality? Corruption is really just one small piece of a much larger, much more complex global puzzle.
Which brings us perfectly to part 4, the megaproject paradoxes, human error, and surprise. To really wrap our heads around this, we need to look at human psychology. Economists call this the planning fallacy. It's the innate human tendency to consistently underestimate the time, cost, and complexity of future tasks. A massive project always looks so simple on a whiteboard in a nice, air-conditioned boardroom. But the truth is, we are fundamentally bad at predicting just how difficult managing thousands of workers and billions of dollars in the real world will actually be.
When you attempt something massive, reality loves to introduce surprises. These are the unpredictable variables that inevitably pop up. You might hit unexpected geological conditions while digging a tunnel, or face sudden global supply chain problems. There are severe weather disruptions, unforeseen economic crises, or, even global pandemics. Sometimes it's incredibly bizarre, like discovering an endangered species of snail right in the middle of your planned tunnel route, pausing construction for months. The bigger the project, the more of these surprise variables just appear out of nowhere, and every single variable adds time.
Let's move to and see how this builds, proving that this isn't just a localized political problem. It's a truly universal issue. Building metro systems means navigating dense urban geology, whether you are in New York or New Delhi. Olympic venues face hard, absolutely unmovable deadlines everywhere. Nuclear plants deal with extreme safety and regulatory hurdles globally. Managing projects of this sheer scale is simply one of the most difficult tasks any organization on Earth can undertake.
And finally, we arrive at part 5, the price we pay, why this matters to you.
Now, you might be thinking these delays only really affect the politicians and the contractors, but they directly impact your daily life. This is the real-world fallout. Every delay means higher costs, which translates to a greater taxpayer burden for you to cover those overruns. It means prolonged, agonizing traffic congestion on your commute while you stare out the window at inactive construction equipment. Businesses lose efficiency, investments get postponed, and overall economic growth slows down. Infrastructure is literally the foundation of the economy. When this system breaks down, we all pay the price. So as technology improves and governments aim to become more accountable, we are left with a pretty critical question. Can governments actually learn to build at the speed our modern economies demand? Or will these massive delays remain the hidden, permanent cost of development? It's a monumental challenge for sure, but understanding the mechanics behind it is the very first step toward demanding better. What do you think? Leave a comment below with the government project in your area that has taken the longest to complete. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and I'll see you in the next one.